good afternoon, everybody. I would like to say that studying at Pitt and earning my Latin American certificate did help me a lot, and I'm really glad that I participated in the program. So for all of you that are earning certificates or other awards today, congratulations. I'd also like to start out by thanking Julian and everybody else in the class community, because ever since, before I even considered getting a certificate and after I graduated from Pitt, I've remained in contact with just about everyone that I was good friends with before. And those relationships have really helped me throughout the year, so I thank you and appreciate the invitation to be here today. It was only 8 years ago that I graduated, so I still remember what it was like to be here and to sit where you sit today. When I was invited to speak here, I wondered what, if anything, I could offer that would be relevant to you as you transition from student life and into the real world. Eventually, I realized that the best thing I could contribute is a little bit of the story of what happened to me after I graduated and was faced with the same transition to the real world that you will soon face. As you already know, I'm a Foreign Service officer with the State Department, and I've had the pleasure of living just about all over the world, working in environments which by some standards would be hard to imagine. During my 2 years studying here at GSPIA, global history, international development, and foreign policy were some of the cornerstones of what I thought my future out in the workplace would rest upon. However, though my time spent at Pitt was amazing, and I learned so much from my peers, along with my tough professors who didn't always make my life easy, some of the things that I learned didn't quite prepare me for what the real world was going to offer. If I've learned anything from my time in the Foreign Service, it's that people who aren't in the Foreign Service love to hear all the crazy stories we diplomats encounter while living abroad. So, if you allow me, I'd like to share some of the more interesting stories, coupled with some important lessons I learned since I graduated. The first lesson I'd like to share with you today is always be prepared to rely on yourself, because in the end, that's the only guarantee you may have. For example, in 2005, I graduated from Pitt and soon thereafter boarded a flight to La Paz, Bolivia, where I would spend the rest of the summer interning at the U.S. Embassy. Now, if anyone remembers what was going on in 2005 in Bolivia, you might understand what kind of summer I was going to have. But for the rest of you who don't, let me explain. For weeks before I arrived, the capital was undergoing several violent street protests, which were escalating day by day, in an attempt to force the then president to resign in order to eventually get the snowball rolling in hopes of putting the current president, Evo Morales, into office. After the near 10-hour flight to Bolivia, we were close to landing when the captain came over the PA system stating that increased violence had forced the airline to divert landing in La Paz and would instead reroute to Santa Cruz. Immediately, panic ensued for the most obvious of reasons. I had no idea where Santa Cruz even was. I was traveling alone, and I didn't have a single phone number of anyone at the embassy to call to report of this sudden change of plans. I was now that person in the movies that ends up in a strange place, left to his own devices where anything could happen. Was this the start of a potential Hollywood screenplay, or was I simply overreacting? Fortunately, I spoke Spanish, and upon debarking the plane, asked one of the airport employees how I was supposed to get to La Paz. Since all U.S. airline companies were no longer flying into the capital, they said I had about 10 minutes to run to the other end of the airport and try to negotiate getting on a local flight myself that might be headed that way. Now, sprinting with 2 bags and a suitcase, I got to the gate and finagled a seat on the plane, which had a stopover in Cochabamba, again, a city I'd never heard of. Finally, arriving in La Paz nearly 4 hours later, I realized that nobody is at the gate waiting for me. No embassy staffer is around holding a sign with my name on it, eagerly awaiting my arrival to take me to my future home for the next 3 months. Nobody's there. What am I supposed to do? I made my way to a help desk employee and said I needed to call the embassy to find out what I was supposed to do. The embassy phone operator directed me to a senior level officer who, upon hearing that I had made it to La Paz, sighed in relief, as he and apparently many other worried officials panicked when they found out my flight had been redirected to another city. I was told to stay put since they didn't know when or if they would be able to send a car up to get me, since the protesters had blocked the road up to the Altiplano where the airport was located. So I sat and I waited. 2 hours later, I hear my name called over the speakers, and I spoke to the same American as before, and they told me that they've arranged for the Bolivian military to send a car up to the Altiplano to get me, and that I need to be able to rush, because if any of the protesters find out that a foreigner is being transported to and from the airport, things could get very serious. As I get into the truck, the military officer tells me to hide below my seat and stay there until I'm otherwise told, because if by some chance I'm spotted, I'm to say I'm a doctor who was brought here to help to save a child's life. In my head, I'm thinking, wow, this Hollywood screenplay is turning out to have a great opening scene. Eventually, we make our way to the embassy, and we're greeted by the same person I had been speaking to on the phone. As I enter the embassy, everyone from the local staff to the Marine Guard say, "Oh, you must be that poor guy that was stuck at the airport." Great, I thought. Everyone already knew about me, and I hadn't even walked in the front door yet. During my security briefing, I was told that since the protests were worsening, I would not be able to come into the office until things settled down, and had to stay home. After about 6 days of basic house arrest, the Bolivian president caved to pressure and resigned, triggering a domino effect which caused the vice president to resign, and so forth. Such an act makes foreign governments nervous, and the next day, the embassy began allowing American employees and their families to return home. They also suggested that all Americans living in Bolivia should leave as well, for fear that the tensions and uncertainty of Bolivian government could elevate the levels of danger everywhere. The interns, therefore, were the first to go. The security people instructed me to pack my bags and wait for the phone call detailing my departure. 2 days later, at around midnight, the call came, and by 3 a.m. it was back up to the Altiplano and on to San Jose, Costa Rica, where I ended up spending the rest of my summer working at the embassy there. I hadn't even officially joined the State Department yet, and I had already gone through what I call a mini coup d'etat experience. This was something even the most seasoned diplomats will never experience themselves, and I was right there in the middle of it. So what I learned was that you should never underestimate your capability to deal with the unexpected, especially if no one else is around to bail you out. Immediately following my summer in Costa Rica, I was presented with lesson number 2. Superman doesn't always wear a red cape, so you may have to be the hero in times of crisis, or maybe not so much. After officially starting my orientation into the Foreign Service, or A100 as it's called, it's customary to participate in a weekend retreat out in the forest that focuses on team building exercises, appropriately called the Woods. While at the Woods, officers are split up into small groups and are tasked with working together as a unit through a series of challenges and staged crisis scenarios in order to achieve a mutual goal. However, this weekend was going to turn what was supposed to be merely hypothetical into a reality. During the final night, all 98 of us gathered at one of the cabins for the End of the Woods party. I was the DJ, everyone was having a good time, and it felt like being back in college, even if I had only graduated 3 months before. As folks mingled in and out of the different rooms and made their way out to the elevated patio, tragedy struck. 1 second, I see to my left 30 or so of my classmates standing. The next, I see them all disappear, as the deck collapses under the weight of too many people. I immediately freeze in shock and disbelief, as if what I had just seen wasn't real. People are screaming, and someone comes up to me yelling, "Turn off the music, turn off the music." A few seconds go by, and I'm still standing there. I don't know what to do. Suddenly, a few of my classmates who had served in the military sprang into action. A few others jumped down to help too. The deck was about 25 feet off the ground and fell inward, trapping many of the people beneath its weight. Just that day, we had practiced a scenario where we were told, in the event of a crisis, not everyone can help. So if you don't know what you're doing, back up and let someone else take over. That's exactly what I did. For what seemed like hours, my classmates were pulled out from underneath the deck, one by one. And in the end, a dozen people had fractured limbs and other serious injuries. I had never been in a situation like that before, and I was surprised at my immediate inability to think and gather my thoughts. Meanwhile, others didn't think twice and literally dove into the disaster zone as if it were second nature. My classmates like to joke that I literally brought the house down since I was the DJ. But luckily, everyone recovered, some over longer periods of time, but they recovered. So what was my takeaway? You never know when your hero moment may come, in what form, and what may be asked of you. Be prepared to know your role if you find yourself in a similar situation. Now, let's fast forward a few years to July 2011. I'm now on my third tour in Islamabad, Pakistan, and which was by far the most challenging and eye-opening of all of my tours so far. However, it's also the tour that offered me some of the best and most memorable lessons of all. Never discount your impact discount the impact of seemingly insignificant acts of kindness or curiosity and what those effects will have on others. Now, I have to say that when I volunteered to serve in Pakistan, everyone I knew thought I was crazy. My family even had large prayer circles the weekend before I departed, in fear that I might not return. What I knew about that country was probably as much as you know right now. CNN and Hollywood were primarily responsible for most of what I thought I knew. However, it couldn't have been further from the truth. It didn't take me long to see that Pakistan is one of the most naturally beautiful countries I've ever had the pleasure to live in. Everything from snow-capped mountains, which would be a skier's paradise, to lush, colorful valleys, perfect for family picnics. What I also learned were that the people of Pakistan are amongst the friendliest and humble of any group I've ever known. Even now, many of the friends I made there still keep in touch and have even come to visit me here in the U.S. And I'll never forget 3 of the times where something that I thought was merely insignificant turned out to have outcomes much greater than expected. The first was at an embassy event not long after I arrived in country. The party had many local Pakistanis in attendance, and towards the end of the night, I began talking with one of the cleaning staff, who asked me about my impressions of things so far. Pakistanis love to hear what Americans think about their country, and I was surprised by the fact that many of them know as little about us as we do of them. Towards the end of our conversation, he said to me, "When you go back to your country, can you please tell your people that we are not all terrorists? Can you please tell them that we are good people, simple people, who just want to live in peace? I assured him that I would, and later that night, I began to think about the magnitude of his request. It struck me heavily that this man's impressions of America was that most of us think everyone in Pakistan was violent and didn't care about harming other people. His hope that me, a random American, so far from home, would be able to spread his word to others back in my country was humbling. However, to him, I was that messenger, and similar requests were made of me throughout the year by others. I realized that even the simplest of interactions could give me the chance to make profound impacts of how people viewed a country and its people that most will never get to see for themselves. Now, in the winter, a group of 7 friends and I spent a holiday in a cabin up in the northern mountains of Nathiagali. While we were there, we went to a nearby hotel, and I noticed that everyone kept staring at me. Not a simple glance, but a clear, jaw-dropping focus. Even though I lived in Islamabad, which had no shortage of foreigners, I was used to the stares, but this time it felt more intense. Trying to ignore the unwanted attention, I noticed a group of 5 tribally dressed men walking up to me. Not knowing what was going to happen, I tensed with apprehension. One of the men came forward and pulled out a camera, and with very little command of English said, "You are American? I picture with you." I smiled and agreed. Suddenly, I noticed that now everyone had stopped what they were doing and was watching us. I felt a little embarrassed, but understood from my previous travels to other countries that probably not too many black people in general, let alone black Americans, make it all the way up to the lower Himalayas of Pakistan. So, I played along. Right before his friend took the picture, he grabbed my hand and said, "America, Pakistan, friend." This may not seem like much, but Pakistan has one of the lowest approval ratings towards the United States. So the fact that these men, whom I have no idea what their level of understanding involving U.S.-Pakistan relations were, approached a complete stranger and outwardly stated their desire for a friendly relationship. It spoke volumes to me. It was something I hope to never forget, and was another example of the way this act of soft power could prove effective. It's now my last day in country, and I'm waiting for the van to pick me up to take me to the airport. As I pack my suitcase, I realize that I had too many clothes, so I go to my guard, who has stood watch over my house every day for the past year, and offer him a large bag of everything I couldn't take with me. His name was Mohammed, and while I didn't know much about him because I didn't speak Urdu and he didn't speak English, I knew that he had a wife, several children, and not more than a uniform and the few dollars he earned every month as a salary. When I handed him the bag of clothes, His eyes opened widely and with great shock and surprise said, "Sir, you give Muhammad gift?" I did my best to say it was for him and his family with probably the worst broken English and hand routine one could imagine. But when I did, he started crying, put down his shotgun, and gave me the biggest hug that it was so strong it actually lifted me off my feet. His final words to me were, "I will miss sir very much. I pray to Allah he keep you safe. Don't forget Muhammad." All three of these examples showed me that making a difference isn't always about who writes the best cable or who gets the most awards for outstanding performance at work. If you really want to make a difference in the world, start by talking to the person next to you. You never know where that conversation could lead. Finally, the last lesson I would like to share with you is the lesson of never burning bridges. My mother always said this to me growing up, and as an adult, there have been far too many times when someone I thought I would never see again keeps popping up when and where I least expect it. It's taught me that you never know where someone you meet today might be tomorrow, next year, or even 10 years from now. So why sever all ties based on the belief that it won't matter since you think you'll never see them again? For those of you out in the class community, this story involves someone you probably know very well. And for that reason, I hope he doesn't mind me telling the story. During my years at Pitt, I became friends with many of the staff who worked at class. And fortunately, a few have kept in touch throughout the years. Now, let's backtrack a few years to 2009, around 2009 to 2010. I'm now living in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, working in my second tour as a vice consul at the Consulate General. I'm the head of the immigrant visa section and have the sole responsibility for adjudicating all of the country's immigrant visas, since Rio is the only post in Brazil that processes them. One day, one of my old class friends says that he's in Rio with his then fiancée, who is one of my applicants for the day. Now, to maintain integrity of the process, I let another colleague do the interview, but before that, I call my friend in so that I can meet his future wife. I laughed to myself, thinking that it's not every day you meet the fiancé of a good friend through bulletproof glass, a microphone, and a large stack of bureaucratic State Department documents. However, I see the nervousness on her face, not knowing the process and knowing even less about me, the person who stands between her and her future life in the U.S. The interview goes well, and my colleague approves the visa. They've now been married for several years, and I love knowing that I had a small part to play in their happiness. I realized that back then, my friend had no idea that a former student might be in a position someday that could positively or negatively influence something as important as his relationship, but luckily it didn't. The lesson here is that you never know where someone you study next to, work alongside, socialize with, or even employ might be in the future. So always keep that in mind if, after a disagreement or conflict, life offers you the chance to burn down a bridge in a raging inferno. Now, as I approach the start of a new adventure in Thailand, I anxiously await whatever the next 3 years has in store. As my first time living in Southeast Asia, I know that my days will be filled with unfamiliarity at every turn. However, keeping an open mind and having the willingness to venture beyond my comfort zone has always led me down the right path. So hopefully, when you find yourself in the same situation, you don't waver. In conclusion, I hope that what I've shared with you today will help guide you as you transition from the possible to the actual. Many of you will be starting exciting careers very soon and will have unique stories of your own to tell. Strive to always leave an impact somehow and somewhere, no matter how big or small. I wish all of you the best, and as my Thai teachers constantly tell me, aim high and you'll eventually fly high. Congratulations to everybody. Thank you.